When your body contains just too much blood, fragments of silicon.
All right, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon, the Daylight Interviews. Up this time is Nathaniel Ayer of Rockwell Studio. Hi,
Hi.
hi. How are you doing today?
Great.
Okay. Right. So, how we like to start things is by asking this particular question to get to know the people behind the games, the studios, and all that sort of thing. And it is, what got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
The thing that got me most interested in video games was when I was a kid in the 80s, and a friend of mine got a Nintendo, and I played Super Mario Brothers at his house, and it was the most amazing thing I had ever seen. Um, Many years later, I played uh, Ogre Battle 64, and I had never played anything like it. And uh, I assume we'll go more into this story later, but I really wished that there was something more like it, and I decided to make something like it, and that's what drove me in the direction of making Himiko story and making video games my profession.
And at what particular moment did you cross that line?
Well, there is quite a story to this, but it was when I was working for the Central Intelligence Agency. No joke. I worked for CIA for 9 years, and I got really, really fed up with it. And I normally would have been tempted to withdraw into just playing a video game. And whenever I'm just really upset about something, that's what I do. I withdraw. But I realized that's not going to get me anywhere. And instead of playing a video game, I thought to myself, what if I tried making a video game? And so I decided to make the video game that at that moment was the game that I wished existed so that I could just go play it. And I quit my job about 4.5 years ago and started working on Himeko Story full time, and just released it into full release 2 months ago.
Oh, I mean, certainly that story has some familiar beats, but I will admit this is the first time we've ever had somebody from the CIA do that kind of thing. I,
Yeah,
and
it's kind of an uncommon resume to bring to game dev.
no doubt, I'm sure that's a lot of lines of work. Like, and probably best to leave that there.
So, if this game is secretly a information gathering technology for the CIA, blink twice. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
We don't
Well,
have face cam on.
right. No, but yeah, with the way that I left things with CIA, I can promise you very honestly, I'm not going to be doing them any favors.
Like I said, there's probably a story there that I like.
Yeah.
There's probably a story there. It's probably a classified story.
Exactly. So, with that in mind, I'm guessing, um, you know, the particular game that you wanted to play was something in the vein of, well, you say Ogre Battle, but honestly, the game that this reminds me of is Nectaris, if you've ever played that.
You know what? I never have. What system was that on? How old is it?
TurboGrafx 16.
Oh, that's going way back.
Yeah. Well, it's the hex field, because not you know. it's the less commonly used style of grid battles
Yeah.
versus
So
squares.
right. And actually, I did a little bit of research on that, or rather, one of my friends showed me some research that he had been doing. He found out that the highest rated, on average, games on Steam are tagged hex based. And so, in the very earliest alpha builds of Himeko Story, the movement was done on a square battle grid. But hex based games tend to be rated higher. So I switched.
Well,
I
yeah,
guess that's one reason to do it.
yeah. There's a whole, let's say, school of thought about the strategic merits of squares versus hexes. What,
To my general understanding, there are benefits. They're better in different circumstances. To my understanding, the consensus is that hexes are better in naturalistic terrain because in those circumstances, it's better for you can or for things that have anything that has a thing with areas of effect. Hexes can work better for that because you can get closer to a circle or a cone that's not like
Yeah.
90 degrees. Um, they're also better in a lot of naturalistic terrain because they map terrain features are in real life more likely to be hexagon like than square like. But that square based uh, maps are usually more effective in buildings, basically, because this may shock you, but when humans build buildings, they tend to build them mostly squares.
Yeah, yeah. And so Himeko Story has a lot of outdoor battle maps, and I definitely did run into a lot of challenges trying to uh, fit the battle maps to the battle grid to line up with the indoor and dungeon settings.
Hmm. Yeah, I saw in the clip that was inside. There's a lot of, oh, this hallway just happens to be one hex wide with a little bit of extra things that you can't actually go into because they're only like a sixth of a hex on the
Yeah,
sides, which is fine. It's just
yeah, yeah.
basically
Games are an
approximating
abstraction.
squares. Yeah, the other thing that triggers some people about hexes sometimes is that there are directions in which you cannot run in a straight line. Um,
well, it's also hex grids are much more. How do I put this? Tactically concrete. That is to say, 6 sides versus 4 sides. There's more sides to
mhm.
deal with. Um, and that's also not getting into the nature of hexagons and how they bunch up versus the nature of squares.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to when people look at a thing. Having up and down not work the same as left and right is sometimes a little bit of an issue,
Yeah.
like mentally to get around.
But
Because like if you've got hexes with the flat side up, you cannot move horizontal without zigzagging a little.
Yeah,
this, this is a very ragey debate among strategy circles for because there are a lot of differences between hexes and squares, and these are the two strategy tiles that are used. Unless you're
Yeah.
just going way off base and doing like triangles or something.
yeah. Well, going way back to the original inspiration for Himeko Story, Ogre Battle 64. It's the battle map where you move your units around. It was actually real time strategy. No spaces, no hexes, no squares. But I just felt like I wanted to make a game that was uh, more, just had a more turn-based strategy feel to it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are certainly games, and and I think there were. I'm trying to remember if it was Ogre Battle or Tactics Ogre that did the turn-based thing. Like,
Oh, well, so Tactics Ogre is in the same series. It's the Ogre Saga, and but Tactics Ogre was much more of a Final Fantasy kind of setup where you've got one character occupying one square on the battle map. Uh, Ogre Battle was something very different that very few games have even attempted to do, where you have, instead of the individual person being the building block of your army, you take all of the people in your army and you organize them into squads, and then the squad is the building block of your army, and then you send your squads out, and then when one squad fights another squad, then they have kind of like an auto battle, but in Ogre Battle you were able to take actions while your characters are fighting. But the big thing that made it different was that the characters would mostly fight autonomously after you tell them who to fight.
Right, and that's another contentious debate in terms of RPG mechanics, because it's not just, say, Ogre Battle that has done this. I'm reminded of like Phantasy Star, which had the same kind of thing, and and then
well, I mean, really, when you think about it, that's something like Fire Emblem. That's basically how it works. You put your characters in the same thing as each other, and then they fight.
Right, right. I'm just saying that there are people who do not like that lack of control.
Yeah, I guess the fact that it's multiple people makes you feel like you might be losing more control with that, because you don't have control with exactly who takes damage or whatever.
Yeah. And it's a balance that you have to make, because if you have a really, really big army, like for example in Himiko story, you can have up to 200 people in your army all deployed into the battle. And if you have, in a turn-based game, if you are picking individual actions for 200 people on your turn, that's going to take forever. And so it picking the individual actions works well for, on the scale of a Tactics Ogre or a Final Fantasy Tactics or something like that, where you have maybe up to 8 people on your team. But then with a much bigger army, then you have to lose some of the individual control in order to keep the action moving along.
Yeah, a lot of the bigger Super Robot Wars games do it by having like, okay, so you have like a crap ton of people on your team, but these ones, like, you make like teams of 2 or 3 or something, and like mostly one person in each squad matters, and then the other ones do like supporting attacks or combination attacks. But like if the person in charge of the team gets taken out, then one of the backup people becomes the new head people.
Yeah, and I think that's how it works in Himiko Satori here.
Well, with Himiko Story, your leader, the first person you put into a squad, we call them lances in the game. It's kind of an older medieval term, comes from French. But the point is that the first person you put into the lance is then the leader, and then that character's leadership score determines how many other people get to go in. And then that leader also gets to apply bonuses. And if you spend some time as an alchemist, then you get bonuses to slimes. If you spend time as a cleric, you can get bonuses to undead. And yeah, so it does matter which leader you have in the party. And if your leader dies during battle, then whatever leadership bonuses you had, those are gone. And then a bunch of slimes led by an alchemist is going to do a whole lot more damage than a bunch of slimes without a leader.
Well, I mean, that's only common sense, I think. But I suppose my next question is, how big of a lance can you have?
You can have up to 10 characters in a lance. So at first, you're going to be limited by the leadership score of your characters, but then as they level up, they'll get more leadership, and then you can add more characters to it. But also, there are some characters who you can add to a lance for free, like skeletons. Skeletons are relatively weak. They're not that useful on their own, certainly nowhere near as versatile as a living human character. but the big advantage there is they have 0 leadership cost. So at the very beginning of the game, the first chance you get to make skeletons, you can pack 10 of them into a lance right away.
Like, sounds like some cheap unit building.
Yeah. And also there are a lot of classes in the game that fill different roles, and one of them is cannon fodder. And some people they really don't like when losing characters in a battle, but sometimes having some people there specifically to take the hit that will save your more important characters. And people who play the game like that, I think that they have an easier time realizing that some of these characters they're expendable.
Well, I suppose that brings up a good question about that. Is there permadeath in the game? Does it matter if a certain, let's say, leadership unit that might be plot relevant dies, like Fire Emblem? Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
That's why certain Fire Emblem players try to play perfect runs, because they know if X and so unit dies, it's going to have an effect on the story.
Yeah, so there are not branching storylines. There are a couple of different endings that you can get, but the storylines don't really change depending on who's in the party. It's the biggest difference is that some of them will appear in certain cutscenes, and then if a character dies, then they just don't show up in that cutscene, and they don't have that line of dialogue that they would have otherwise. But yes, the game does have permadeath, and so you do have to be very careful about your units. And if there's somebody who you don't want to die, then this is going to make sure that, well, this is a high stakes battle, and every time you go to battle, you are risking losing those units. And if you lose one of your main characters, there are 3 main characters in the game. There are 3 sisters, and if any one of them dies, then it's game over. There are a couple of characters who are essential to the plot, and they are immortal. They're invincible. If they drop to 0 hit points, then they disappear. They say, instead of their speech saying, "Oh, I'm dead," they say, "Sorry, I have to withdraw," and then they retreat. They just disappear from the battlefield.
That's always a bit of a juggling act, because having somebody plot relevant die, then you get into major branches and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
I suppose the junction in question here is, how many endings are there in the game?
Well, there's really just one ending, but then there are little changes. So depending on a couple of decisions that you'll make during the game, then I mean it's pretty much the same ending, but there will be I don't know how to put it. It's but there will be, the dialogue will be different. The ending is a little bit different, I guess. Okay, I'll say there are 2. There are 2 major differences in the endings that you can get, but then there are a couple of smaller differences. Like, did you ever play Wasteland 2? In Wasteland 2, you make decisions throughout the game, and the game plays pretty much the same way, and you get to the same battle, and you get the same ending more or less. But then, like, depending on who you sided with, then the world is awful, and this team controls the territory, or the ending is awful, and this team controls the territory. So it's kind of like that amount of difference in how the game ends.
I see. Like, is it, I guess, without getting into spoilers, is it in those terms of downer endings?
Well, it's not a super happy ending. You kind of have to when you play Himiko story, you have to realize, you know what, this is a war, and there are going to be a lot of bad things that happen. And this is something that I try to remind the player of, that, you know, as the war spreads, then you're going to end up fighting people who you didn't originally intend to fight, and the war, it's gonna get worse. And when you're in a bad situation, then sometimes the only thing you can do is hope for the least bad thing to happen.
It's a good life lesson. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so moving on a bit. So we've talked about the lances. Going a bit higher, how big of an army can you have? Like, how many lances can you control in a battle?
So in most battle maps, you can have 20 lances of 10 people. So you can have up to 200 people going to war, going into battle. There are some battle maps that are smaller, and you won't be able to deploy quite as many, but late in the game, you'll have mostly big battle maps, and so you can have battles of 200 people on your team. The enemy sometimes will have reinforcements, and the enemy doesn't have all of the same restrictions. So sometimes you'll have battles of more than 200 versus 200, but for the most part, it's going to be up to 200 characters on your side going to battle.
I can see why this was streamlined a fair bit. Like, the thought of having to do 200 turns per turn is just, quite frankly, maddening.
Yeah,
even
that would be a bit
even
too
20
much.
is a little on the high side for a lot of games like this.
Yeah, and most people, when they play the game, most of them don't fill up the whole 200, and most of them don't deploy a full 20 lances. Most of them kind of make their specialized units and then make those really good, and then they kind of stick with those. They say, you know what I have here, this works pretty well for me. This is gonna be the team that I go to battle with. And usually it'll be, you know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 lances or 12 lances, maybe. But if they wanted to have more, they could.
I suppose another question in that regard is, can you have lances in reserve? You know, you can put them together, but you don't deploy them in a battle.
No. So, you know, that was something that I had given some thought to, but I'm just one programmer, and I thought about, you know, what interesting new choices could I add to the game by letting you either deploy right away or save them and have them in reserve, or perhaps limit the number that you can deploy on your first round and then add more. And it does give you some more some interesting choices, but I thought that it wasn't enough for me to take the time to program that in. And that's when you're a single developer, you have to make trade-offs like this all the time, where you say, okay, well, I could add this feature, but then I could spend that much time working on this other thing, and which one would be better. So as much as I would want to add the extra layer of decision making on having reinforcements come in and keeping some units in reserve, I never got around to it.
Well, you being just one developer raises another question. A lot of these games, one of the important things is how effective the enemy tactical decision making is. So, is most of that pre-programmed? Like, to what extent do they respond to stuff that you're doing and like change around what their plans are? I mean, I'm sure you can't have the computer plan too many steps ahead usually, but
yeah. So the artificial intelligence, the decision making, it's actually really simple. The enemy will it has a score that it gives to each one of your lances, and then it says, okay, well, whichever one of your lances has the highest score, that's who I want to try to attack. And then it has things like, well, can I attack you on this round? And are you a ranged lance and I'm a melee lance? Sorry, melee lance. And if you can attack a ranged lance with a melee lance, then you do extra damage. And also, it does one thing that's kind of pulling punches. It checks to see if you have healers in the lance. And so if you have a healer in the lance, then you'll prefer to attack that lance. And the reason why I did that was because I didn't want to make it so deadly that you would just lose all of your characters all the time. So it does prefer to attack you if you have healers. So that's pretty much its decision making.
Okay.
Right. So we've talked about the macro in terms of units and lances and all that, but and we've touched a bit upon the micro, but I think it's time to delve into classes, because I suppose first of all, how many character classes are there in the game, and what are they?
Yeah. So there are 20 character classes for human characters, and there are two general trees. There's the tree that starts off with the adventurer, and there's the tree that starts off with the student, and then the student and the adventurer, they get 3 classes each that they can go into, and then those 3 classes each get 2 classes, and so there are 12 top tier classes for humans, and a lot of them are the traditional fantasy character classes that you can go into, like knight and mage and cleric and paladin and ranger and druid, and the others in the game, they are warlock, berserker, rogue, illusionist, and alchemist and gunner. Those are the 12 top character classes. Then you also have different classes for wolves, and you have classes for fairies and the undead and dragons. And so all of your crafted characters, all of the characters that you summon, the non-human characters who you have to get some other way, then you can't just hire them at a mercenary. They all have unique character classes.
And are those like character classes beyond like wolf or dragon?
Yeah, so there's a wolf skirmisher, which will prefer to target the weakest enemy in the lance, and you have a wolf alpha, which gives a leadership bonus to the other characters. There's a wolf dreamwalker that has an area of effect attack that it's like a howl that causes a debuff to the enemy, and dragons. There's the dragon fire breather, which has an area of effect fire attack, and there's the dragon that does the biting attack, and then there's like the fortune dragon and the plague dragon. Yeah, there are lots of different classes, even for your non-human characters.
And what is the how do I put this? The interplay of classes like? Like, are there classes that are strong or weak to other classes?
So kind of. I had thought a little bit about like damage types and like a paper, rock, scissors kind of system. In the end, I decided not to do that because if you set up your army one way, then if you fight, it doesn't work very well in battles this big because you set up your army the way that it works, and then you can't really it's harder to specialize and switch roles. That's a lot easier to do. It's a lot more fun to do when you have a smaller army and you say, oh, I'm fighting this ice monster, let me start using my fire spells. But then with a game where you don't have direct control over the individual actions that they take, I decided it wasn't going to work well. So the way that the classes interact is you can give them synergies, and so the interesting way that the classes interact is the way that you build your lances. And so you say, okay, well, I can put this many characters in the lance, and so I want to have my melee units on the front row where they're going to take most of the hits if I keep the front pointed towards the enemy. And I'm going to want this many healers, and I'm going to want this guy who does a buff spell to keep the people alive. And so the real fun of the interplay between the character classes is building your lance, building your army the way that works best for you.
Okay.
Do you have facing mechanics, by the way?
Yes, yeah. So there are a couple of different things that change depending on which way your lance is facing. So first off is most character classes target the closest enemy. So if you are facing your enemy, then you've got your whole front line that can share the damage coming from the enemy. But if the enemy attacks you from the side, then you have only two people that you can have on the side of your line. And so the damage is a lot more focused if they attack from the side. Also, there's a flanking attack where if you're surrounded, if there's somebody from the front and in the back, then the person attacking from the back is going to do a lot more damage.
I suppose along those lines, is there also a terrain mechanic?
No, there's no terrain mechanics. So the different maps, they don't have an effect on the battle. They are just purely cosmetic.
Okay. And I suppose shifting a bit, the magic system. How elaborate is it?
Okay, so it is. There are a few things to go into here. So first off is the element system. So you know how some games have the fire and ice and earth, and that's the basis for their magic system. So the way that the system works in Himiko Story is there are 6 elements, and each one is opposed to one across a circle. The way that I have it set up, and then each of the top character class tiers has kind of like a fighter class and a caster class, and then both of those rely on the same element. And so if you have for example, a mage and a knight, they both rely on the blue element, and if you have your knight switch to level up as a mage, then you'll still get level ups in the blue element. And so a knight can cross class as a mage and still get stronger in both classes. The other thing is you can learn these special abilities called reactions, which is kind of like a bonus attack that you can do during a battle if the right trigger event occurs. And so that could be something like your ally takes damage, and so you heal your ally, or you block an attack, so you get to make a counter attack, and you get to keep all of those abilities from all of the classes that you've learned. And so it can be advantageous for you to spend lots of time switching your characters around into different classes to learn the different abilities. And but then what'll happen is if you, say, learn a healing ability as a druid and then switch classes to something that is based on another element, then that healing ability is not going to get any more powerful because you're no longer leveling up the skills that that ability relies on. But it's still useful to have those abilities. It's still useful to multi-class to learn those abilities. So so it's not like when you ask about the magic system, it's not like, say, you know, one of those games where you create your own spells and then you put those spells on your hotkeys. But there is a pretty deep skill system where you'll want to learn these abilities and spells in these other classes because they're useful even after you leave that class.
So, like a job system?
Yeah, it's similar to a job system like you'll commonly see in the Final Fantasy games, or Final Fantasy has been a huge inspiration to me, and especially Final Fantasy Tactics. And a lot of the ideas that I had came from games like that. And yeah, the job system is similar to Final Fantasy Tactics, where you'll start off in one of the base classes, and then you'll unlock another class and then learn skills there, and then the skills that you learn there, you can carry those over into the next class that you change into.
Okay. And now, what about weaponry?
Okay, so yeah, there are lots and lots of weapons in the game, and there are abilities that let you specialize in one weapon or specialized in like two-handed weapons, and I tried to make it an interesting. I tried to make the decisions and the options that you have. I tried to make them something interesting, and so that it's not just a matter of it's all of the weapons are the same, but it's just a matter of changing the number that weapon represents. And so so early on in the game, you will have weapons that are pretty similar, and the only difference is cosmetic. Uh, but but later in the game, as your characters start to specialize, and then you'll start finding special weapons, then you'll say, okay, well, do I want a weapon that does more damage, or do I want a weapon that that gives me a bonus attack, or do I want this two-handed weapon that does a lot of damage, or do I want a one-handed weapon with a shield, or a one-handed weapon with like a bonus item that gives me a bonus to something else? And so there are lots of weapons in the game, and also a unique feature of Himiko Story is that it's pixel art, but also every piece of equipment has its own unique sprite sheet. And so it's very common in 3D games to you put on a different suit of armor, or you equip a different weapon, and that changes the appearance of your character. In pixel art games, almost nobody does that because it is so intensive trying to draw all of these frames of animation for every item in the game. But I guess I just really like pain because that's what I did. I drew all of these different frames of animation for every weapon, every piece of armor in the game.
I gotta ask, how long did that take?
It took uh, hours and hours out of the day for months at a time. I spent actually, to help me get started, I had a Kickstarter, and probably 60 or 70% of the money that came in from that Kickstarter went to buying the pixel art that I needed to really get the game moving. And then after that, after the Kickstarter money was gone, I still didn't have enough items in the game, and so I drew for hours and for months, and I was working on Himiko Story full time for 4 years, and I don't know. I mean, maybe a whole year of my life was spent making pixel art.
I'm like, that's some impressive dedication, if nothing else. But
Yeah.
well, I suppose I have to ask, what was it? You say you were working full time on Himiko's story, but were you doing like contract work on the side to supplement your
No.
income?
No.
Wow.
So what happened was I had my very cushy, stable government job, and I quit, and I took what savings we had, and my family and I moved to Egypt. About 4.5, 5 years ago, Egypt had the value of its currency crashed, and Egypt suddenly became the most affordable place in the world for an American to live. And so we moved here, and we basically lived off of the low cost of living and the strength of the dollar until Himeko Story started making money. And no, I have not been doing contract work or getting an income from anyone else. I've just been working on Himeko Story.
I gotta admit that is some impressive dedication. It's like, yeah, I don't think it's the first time we've had somebody move to, another country, but it was more Eastern Europe. Like
Yeah.
Romania.
And if any one of your listeners want to know, I do not recommend it. Things worked out for me because of my specific situation. My wife and I both speak Arabic, and we were blessed enough to have the money to start this major change. But I would say for most people, it's not the smartest thing. It's not the best way to get started on your game development dreams. I would recommend for most people try to find some other way of doing it.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that the amount of people that are going to go to Egypt to start a video is not high.
Yeah.
But still good advice, I think. But anyway, that being said, Himiko's story has been out, let's say, for quite a while. Not just in its current 1.0 release and post release, but it was in early access for like 2 years, as I understand it.
Yes, yeah, it was in early access for 2 years, and when we say early access, I mean, yeah, it was early access. There wasn't when I released it 2 years ago. It was kind of a vertical slice of the game, where it had most of the systems in place, and you could play through it enough to see what the game was like, but there wasn't a lot of content, and so. You leave the first area and you get into the second area, and from there wasn't a whole lot more to do. There might have been 6 to 8 hours of content, but the major change from the beginning of early access until full release, the biggest change has been the amount of content in the game, and this game is huge, and somebody who plays through it very, very quickly can finish the game in, I would say, about 20 hours. But if you go on Steam and you take a look at the people leaving reviews, especially the people who leave positive reviews, the people who really enjoyed the game, you can see that they've been playing for 100 hours, 150 hours. And, they get as much time out of Himeko Story as I got out of Skyrim. They have gotten a lot of play out of this game.
That's not surprising, given the size of this and the genre. But there is another feature that we have not quite touched upon yet that extends the life of the game, and that is this comes with an editor.
Yes, yeah, it sure does. Yeah, and it was my biggest hope from the beginning that, I could make something and hand it off to other people and they would enjoy it so much that they would also want to participate in this, and that the engine that I made to tell my story, I would make it available for others to tell their stories. And yeah, it comes with the fully featured Unreal Engine 3 editor, and I'll be honest with you, it is unwieldy. It is big, it is complicated, it has a steep learning curve, but it is a very professional piece of software, and it is the exact same editor that I used for making Himiko Story. And so anybody who has the time and the dedication, they can make any game with Himeko Story. And it's you could literally make any other game, any game that you would make with the Unreal Development Kit. Technically, you could make with the Himeko Story editor, but I have provided this base for everyone. I've provided all of the source code and all of the assets that everything that you have seen in the game. You can take that and just copy and paste it, and you can start off your own adventure with that. And so far, I haven't seen anyone release any finished campaigns. Well, then again, I mean, we only released the full game 2 months ago, but quite a while ago, some people started working on some mods for the game, and one of the most popular mods has been a portrait replacer, and a lot of people thought that the portraits in the game were kind of generic, and I have to agree with them. They kind of are. But one of the first and most popular mods that we saw for the game was something that lets you edit your characters and even upload your own portraits, and that's been something very fun to see. Other people putting their own characters into the game with their own portraits and personalizing the game. And so, yeah, I did include the editor and all of the source code and all of the assets, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else people come up with.
Yeah, it's just I imagine that would take a while since we are talking about like basically building a new game, if I'm understanding this correctly, versus just a cosmetic mod.
Yeah. It's some people have complained about how difficult the editor is to use, and I understand it is a complicated piece of software, but yeah, you can make pretty much anything with it. Anything that anyone ever made with the Unreal Development Kit, that is within reach of anybody who wants to mod Himeko Story, and it gives you, with all of the content that I've included, it gives you quite a head start. Even if you didn't want to make a game like Himeko Story, it provides the perfect basis for a more of a small scale tactics game or a monster hunting Pokemon like game. It has so much potential, and I really hope that I see people fulfilling that potential.
Well, I suppose that dovetails into another question: is how well is this game done in its completed state?
So I would say that right now I am done with adding new features. I'm still fixing bugs as they come up, and so we're now at the point where we're beyond all of the worst of the stability bugs. But I am continuing to fix bugs that are mostly very, very specific cases, like this cutscene started, but this character died, and so the quest didn't proceed, and I didn't test for that before, so I go in and I fix that bug, and I say, okay, try it again, and it works. But I'm still adding kind of like small content updates, and by small I mean like I'm adding new weapons to the game and new crafting recipes. Those are relatively small, relatively easy to do. I can do that pretty quickly. I'm not planning on adding like a major B plot to the game, a major side quest or anything. Although it's something that I haven't ruled out. I'm still waiting to see what sales are like for Himeko Story, and if it would be my dream for this to be like a Stardew Valley, where it was successful enough that the developer of Stardew Valley has just continued adding free updates, and he has made that his life's work, and is making millions of dollars off of it. And I would love to see success like that, and I would love to continue working on Himeko Story for the fans for as long as they want me to do it. But for now, I'm just kind of filling in the cracks wherever I see oh, the late game crafting is kind of weak, so I'm going to add more recipes for these epic weapons late in the game so that there's a reason to continue crafting, and so I'm doing updates like that. But so far, nothing really big.
Fair. I think that's fair given um, where the game is at this point in time. And I suppose that gets to a thornier question, and that's how well has the game performed in the marketplace thus far?
Well, it has been. Well, there are kind of two ways of looking at it. One way is just taking a look at the absolute income, and the for a Steam release, it's already it's already at like the 90th percentile of income for Steam releases. But I mean, just to be honest with you, most games released on Steam aren't very good. So that's perhaps not a great comparison. But if I take a look at the amount of time that I spent on Himeko Story, and I divide the sales by 4 years, then it's roughly the equivalent of a job at McDonald's. It's maybe I made a little bit more than minimum wage on average during my time working on it, but as what I'm hoping will happen is word of mouth will get some more popularity to the game, and then as the game continues to sell, my average income per time spent on the game will go up as the game uh, has sold for longer, and as I work on it less.
Okay. Um, and I suppose my next question is, looking back on things, are you proud of the work that you've done?
Well, I am very glad to have finished the game. This has been a major chapter of my life. Not only the amount of time that I spent working on the game, but the amount of years that I spent frustrated with my job before, and finally deciding, okay, you know what? I am done with this. I'm gonna go do something else. And so uh, I I am glad that I have finished this game. This is my way of saying, okay, you know what? This is a chapter in my life that I am now done with, and it feels good that that this is what I have accomplished, and I have moved on. I set this goal, and I have achieved it. Um, of course, I am the person most familiar with Himeko Story, and I can see all of the places now where I could have done better, and where I say, well, you know what? 4 years ago or 5 years ago, before I even started working on it full time, I really had no idea what I was doing, and if I could redo it all now, then I would do it totally differently. And so I take a look at those parts of the game, and I wish that I had done that differently. But you reach a point where you have to say, okay, you know what? I can't keep working on this forever, and I have to move on. So it's kind of a complicated answer to a relatively simple question. You know, am I proud of how the game has done? I'm proud of having accomplished the a full release of a game. I don't think, however, that I will ever be completely satisfied because I am aware of the shortcomings, and just the fact of life is I do have to move on and work on other things eventually.
Of course, of course. Um, right, so we are running low on time, so I'll ask a couple more questions. I'll see if my colleagues here have any for you. Have you looked into bringing Himiko's story to other platforms?
I would really love to, but I can't. There's no way. It's written in Unreal Engine 3, which is an absolutely ancient engine now, and so it is not even possible to port it to modern hardware that besides the PC. So I am planning on doing a Mac build, and then depending on how that goes, then I might also try doing a Linux build, but there is no hope for Switch. There's no hope for PlayStation. It would be easier for me to start over from scratch in Unreal Engine 4 or Unity than to try to port the game from Unreal Engine 3 to modern hardware.
Fair enough. I did think it was a bit unusual that this was running in UE3.
Yeah. It's because I've been working on it for so long, and I started working on it before Unreal Engine 4 was widely available. And when Unreal Engine 4 became available, I said, okay, you know what? I can either scrap everything that I've done and start over, or I can keep going. And I decided to keep going.
And okay, narrowing down to the PC, can you bring this to, say, GOG or the Epic Game Store?
Yeah, so I'm planning on releasing a DRM-free version on GOG, on Itch, and Humble, and I'll get to those in time. It is a little bit of a pain in the neck to maintain all of these different distributions, all of these different builds. So what I really want to do is get the Steam version to a point where I say, okay, well, I don't think I'm going to have to do any more major updates to this, and then I'll take that build and then I'll put that on these other storefronts.
Okay. All right, so we need to wrap up here. Petty, do you have any questions?
No, I think I'm good.
I guess not.
Yeah, I guess that's about it. But thank you very much for having me on your show. I am so glad that I got to come here and talk about my game. I love talking to fans of the video games, and I love talking about the story behind Himiko Story, and I love telling other people about this. And I'm just so glad that you gave me this opportunity. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. It was good having you on the program. And hopefully your game will find the success that you seek. And
well, thank you.
Yes, and we wish you good luck in the endeavor. Anyway, so in the meantime, the game is Himiko's Story. It's currently on Steam for $22.99. Be sure to pick it up today. Right, so that'll about do it for this installment. Be sure to tune in for the Sunday reviews, and until then, wish you good gaming.